today's video, I'm going to be demonstrating and doing a first impressions review of the new Makeup by Mario Ethereal Eyes eyeshadow palette. So I'm going to be showing you how I did this look. I'm also going to have some comparisons to another palette that I already had in my collection that I thought would be pretty similar to the Makeup by Mario palette. I'm also going to be briefly demoing and talking a little bit about this new to me Pixi eyeliner that I got, as well as this new to me Givenchy lipstick. So if you'd like to see all of that, just keep on watching. Before I get into talking more about the eyes and the eyeshadow palette, I wanted to show you a new lipstick. This is one of the Givenchy sheer matte velvet lipsticks. I have it in the shade 10, Beige Nude, and I just wanted to show you myself applying this because I have never tried this formula prior to getting this lipstick, and I've never been able to talk about it on my channel. So that's the swatch of it on my hand, and let's get it onto the lips. So there's Beige Nude on the lips. I really like this formula. It does have a scent, so I have to mention that. And it's kind of a florally type baby powder type scent. I don't really know how to describe it, but I don't find it to be too strong, and I find it does actually fade fairly quickly once it's on your lips, but it is definitely there, at least when you're first applying it. But it's just such a pleasure to apply this formula. It feels more moisturizing when you're applying it. So it feels more moisturizing than really any of the other kind of sheer velvet matte type lipsticks that we've seen come out. Rare Beauty has some, Makeup by Mario has some, Dior, NARS. They all have these kind of similar formulas, or at least the formulas that are making similar claims. But this one to me is definitely the most comfortable from among all those ones that I've just mentioned. It feels more moisturizing, almost a little bit like it has some oil in it when you're first applying it to the lips. And because of that quality, as well as the sheerness of it, I can almost just get lost applying it. You can keep applying and applying, and it never drags or skips. It just feels really comfortable, and you can build up the color really gradually and get it everywhere that you need to. And I think probably especially because this is a lighter nude color, you don't have to be as careful as you would with a darker color in terms of making sure that it's not slipping over the lip line. But because of the shape of the bullet, it has a really nice kind of sharp tip on it. It's really easy to get into those harder to get areas, so I can get right into the corners of my lips with that, and also do a little bit of almost overlining with just the lipstick itself on the upper lip, just because of the shape of it. So initially, even now, it still feels kind of moisturizing, a little bit balmy on the lips. It will dry down though, but I find it to be, again, the most comfortable over time of the formulas that I've just mentioned. There's just something that's a little bit thinner feeling. It doesn't feel as powdery as some of the other formulas, and I really enjoy it, and it does wear very well. So getting back to the eyeshadow palette, I'm going to show you now how I did this eye look. I ended up using most of the shadows in here. When I'm doing a normal everyday look, I wouldn't be using as many shadows, but when I'm doing a review, and even especially a first impressions, I want to kind of make sure that I'm using as many as I reasonably can. So I think there were probably only 2 shades. I think I didn't use that one, and I didn't use that one maybe, that I didn't use in this look. But as I said, this is kind of an unnecessarily complex look, just because I wanted to kind of layer and play with all of the different formulas and colors that are in this palette. So I'm going to show you now how I did this eye look. And here's the completed eye look with mascara on. I found this palette very pleasant to work with. The mattes are quite powdery. You can probably even see, maybe in the pan, you can see some of the powder kick up. And I did get actually quite a lot of fallout, specifically from this lightest shade here. And that's probably about how I was applying it. I was kind of just applying with abandon because it's such a light shade. I wasn't really thinking of being too careful with it. I kind of wanted a wash of it all over my lids. But later on, while I was using some of the other colors, I noticed in the mirror that I had quite a significant amount of powder fallout from that shade on my cheek. It wiped off very easily, but I think had it been a darker shade, that would have been a whole other issue. But I think as long as you're careful, perhaps tapping off the brush is the best method for this one, just because these mattes are a little bit more dry and powdery, but they glide on the eyes really beautifully, and they're really a pleasure to apply because it feels like you can just use the kind of feather lightest touch when you're applying these, and it gives this beautiful diffused look. I think the name Ethereal Eyes is probably more meant to refer to the sparkly shades in this palette, but I think it applies beautifully to the mattes too because of that kind of feather light feel that they have, the glide that they give on the eye, and just that easy kind of powdery diffusion that you get when you're applying these shadows. But the shimmers as well are really beautiful. Now, if you don't like sparkly topper shades, then this palette is probably not worth it for you. For me, it was the main draw to this palette because that's really one of my favorite kinds of eyeshadows. It's really appealing to me, especially right now. I'm just really drawn to those kind of sparkly topper shades that don't have too much of a base pigment to them, but will be kind of transformative and give that really scintillating and ethereal look when you apply them onto the eye and layer them over other shadows. So these three here are more of the topper shades. This one, the middle one here, I find to have a stronger base pigment than these other two. I'm gonna do individual hand swatches of each of these shades so we can get into that a little bit more later on. But then we have these other two metallics here as well, but I find that each of these is a different formula from one another as well. So this one here is a more kind of standard metallic, a more kind of smooth metallic without a lot of sparkle going on. It's just a nice shiny metallic. This one here though is like a strong base pigment metallic with some of those more sparkly shimmers in it as well. So we might as well get into the individual hand swatches. Now, I've taken this idea completely from two other creators that I love watching for palette reviews, Martina Lily and Lauren May. They both do this setup where they do overhead shots of them swatching every single shade individually on their hand or on their arm. And I find that is such a kind of satisfying way to view a palette. It really helps you to get to know each of the shades. And I haven't seen anyone do that yet in reviewing this palette, so I wanted to try it. I'm not going to be doing overhead shots, so the quality of my images probably won't be as beautiful and satisfying as Martina's and Lauren's tend to be, but I just wanted to kind of give that treatment to this palette. I'm just going to go from there, there, and there. And these shades don't have special names. They're just numbered 1 through 12. EE 1 through 12. EE being for Ethereal Eyes. So there's our first shade, EE1, described as a creamy beige matte. Not too far off from my skin tone. You can see it's a little bit more kind of yellowy and deeper than my skin, but just a really useful shade to have. And I find a lot of palettes these days, or at least the ones that I'm buying, don't have that type of shade in them, and I actually quite like having that. There were a few of the Anastasia palettes that I used to use a few years ago, and they often tended to have those really light matte shades, and I kind of missed them, so I'm happy to see that one here. Next up is EE2, which is one of the topper shades. It's described as a champagne shimmer, so that's it right there. Next up is EE3, a muted peach matte. And you can see this one has a little bit more pigment, so you have a better sense of how it blends out. You can just see how effortlessly that diffuses. EE4 is another matte, a soft brown matte. You can see the initial pigment is quite strong, but you can blend it out so easily, and look how that spreads over my hand. So I would say definitely best to probably tap off your brush after you dip it into the pan, because you can see just how much pigment is available with these mattes. Next up, EE5 is a cool taupe matte. It's on this finger here. And that's a beautiful taupe. It's cool toned, but not too gray. You can see the mix of brown and gray, almost a little bit of a kind of lavender note in there. It's lovely. Next up, EE6, described as a sandy shimmer. And this is the one of those topper shades that I said I felt like had a bit more base pigment than the other two toppers. It could also just be that this is a deeper shade, so you can kind of see the base a little bit more easily. I'm trying to get it also on an area where I don't have any staining whatsoever from any of those mattes. You can see the color is consistent across, so it definitely does have that kind of rosy, brownish, pinky kind of base to it. And then the shimmer, you can see, reflects quite cool. That's a really beautiful one. I think that one could work really well all over the whole eyelid. And I find that one kind of interesting because in the pan it does look quite gray and cool toned, but when you actually put it on the skin, you can see a lot more of the warmth from that base coming through. I'm going to switch over to my other hand for the next couple, just to allow that skin to kind of calm down. It's a little bit red from rubbing off the shades. The next one is EE7 right here, which is a dusty mauve matte. And that was actually the second one I went in with today. The first one after that very light, kind of almost my skin tone creamy shade. And that's the shade that I was a little bit concerned about in this palette, because often these kind of dusty pinky mauve shades that look dusty mauve pink in the pan will go kind of orange basically on my eyes. It remains to be seen if that will happen. It hasn't happened so far though, so I've still got that kind of nice pinky influence from that shade, but we'll have to see over time as the day goes on. That could still go a little bit orange. Next up is EE8, a medium brown metallic, almost like a bronzy metallic, like a cool bronze metallic, but looks more warm and rosy as I blend it out. And this is another one that just has a great ability to really spread out. And this is the one that I said is more like kind of a straightforward metallic. It doesn't have really glittery, discernible shimmery particles in it. Just a beautiful smooth metallic. And I actually loved how this one applied on my eyes. I applied it kind of over top of the darker mattes that I had built up in the outer corner, and it just added this beautiful kind of softening quality without taking away too much of the depth, but it really just kind of smoothed everything over, softened it up a little bit, and it actually added a little bit of warmth to that part of the eye, which I appreciated because it had gotten pretty cool with the darkest matte that I had kind of built up in the outer corner there. Next up is EE9, neutral brown matte. Another one that just spreads out phenomenally well. And you can see how it can build up. That one to me is a little bit more on the warm side of neutral for sure. Then we have our last of those three topper shades, and this is EE10, described as a golden shimmer. almost a silvery reflect, kind of a cool champagne reflect on that one. Then we have EE11, a soft pewter metallic, which I think is one of its kind in this palette. Here, that's a very beautiful shade. I feel like this type of shade is really popular these days. Kind of like a cool taupe metallic with a lot of dimension. There's one that's kind of similar in the Pat McGrath, the Mothership 10 palette, kind of like a pewter, dimensional pewter. I think there's going to be at least one shade that's kind of like this in the Natasha Denona Retro Glam as well. Really high shine on that. And then last but not least, we have EE12, a rich brown matte. And that to me is one of the coolest tones in the palette. Almost kind of purpley brown. Quite cool. Now the palette in my collection that I thought would most closely resemble this new Mario palette is the Wayne Goss Pearl palette. So there's that one. And I was actually especially interested to see how the Celestial shade in the Wayne Goss would compare to the topper shades in the Mario palette, but I think you can see the overall color scheme there. They have a lot of similarities. Wayne Goss has this kind of sandy metallic that you don't really have in the Mario, because the one that kind of looks like that is actually more of a topper, whereas the Wayne Goss is more of a standard metallic. You've got that rosy, mauvey kind of matte. You've got a light creamy matte, and you've got the matte grayish, which most closely resembles this one here. And then that kind of mid-toned brown that probably aligns. I'll do some comparison swatches. And then of course the shimmery topper Celestial shades. There's the gray from the Wayne Goss compared to the most similar in the Mario. I much prefer the shade in the Mario palette actually. It's just a less cool, kind of more taupey shade as opposed to a more gray shade in the Mario. The two matte formulas actually feel quite similar in these two palettes. Some of the shades in the Mario feel more creamy to the touch. So there is the creamy shade in Mario compared to the creamy shade in the Wayne Goss. It's more peachy in Wayne Goss and more yellow in Mario. Then we have the rosy shade in Mario compared to the rosy shade in Wayne Goss. The rosy shade in Wayne Goss does sometimes do that turning orange thing on me. It didn't the first few times I wore it, but then since then there have been a couple times I've worn it that it's turned orange, other times it hasn't. In the swatches, the Mario actually looks warmer and more peachy. Mid-tone matte brown from Mario and the mid-tone matte brown from Wayne Goss. Wayne Goss is warmer. And here's the topper shade from the Wayne Goss palette. This is one of my favorite eyeshadows and really one of the best toppers that I have. And I think it most closely resembles that middle topper shade. There they are, that's the Wayne Goss, that's the Mario. Wayne Goss, Mario. The Wayne Goss definitely looks like it has less of a base pigment than the Mario. And on my fingers, I thought that the Wayne Goss looked quite a lot shinier, but in the swatches, I'm actually seeing quite a similar level of reflect on the two of them. I'm gonna grab the topper shade in the Mario palette to compare that as well. And I would say in the swatch that probably looks more similar to the Wayne Goss. And then the bottom topper shade, we'll throw that in too. That might actually be the most similar, but they all have kind of different undertones going on, but with a similar level of reflect and transparency, at least in these three here, not with that middle topper that I find has more base. I forgot to mention that I also used this Pixi liner. You would have seen me using it in the demo. This is the Rose Glow of the Pixi eyeliners, and this purchase was 100% inspired by Lauren May Beauty. I've seen her use this several times. I just love the way she does her eyeshadows. Her style really appeals to me and inspires me, and I love how her looks turn out when she uses this. So I decided I'd give that a try, and it worked really beautifully. It was a nice base for the eyeshadow. It didn't really change the color too much, but just gave a little bit of a kind of slightly tacky, smoothed out base for the powder eyeshadows, and it worked beautifully as an eyeliner as well. And I think this shade is a great pairing for the Mario palette. So overall, I'm very happy with this Mario palette. I'm sure you've probably seen several other reviews of this by now, but I just wanted to share my own thoughts on it and share a bit of a demo. The packaging is very nice, actually. It has a great weight to it. It's metallic, unlike most of his other packaging, which is plastic, so this has a more luxurious high-end feel than most of the other Makeup by Mario packaging that I've encountered. And I think for the price of the palette, that's a very good thing, because I think it would be quite disappointing to pay the relatively high price tag for this and get that kind of cheap feeling plastic packaging. So the overall experience of this is really lovely. I find these shadows very easy to work with. I love these types of topper shades, so I'm really excited to have these three toppers, plus this also really beautiful kind of scintillating metallic in here. The mattes blend out beautifully. As I've said before, I would say probably tap off your brush after you dip into the pan with these mattes, because they did give me fallout, specifically that very light shade. I can just see this palette really appealing to so many people, and I can definitely see it being a real go-to for me on an everyday basis. It's just going to be very easy to create a wide range of neutral looks with this, all the way from very light, kind of no makeup looks, to my more everyday type look, which is not too deep, but maybe just a matte all over the lid topped with one of the toppers. I'm really looking forward, for example, to trying this matte with this topper all over it. That's going to be a lot of fun, but then you can also go quite dramatic and smoky, but still use those toppers and metallics to get a beautifully ethereal look. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope it was helpful if you've been thinking of this palette, and I hope my comparison was helpful as well. If you already have the Wayne Goss and you're completely satisfied with it, I would say you probably don't need the Mario one. But if you feel like you wanted a little bit more depth out of this, just a little bit more variety of tones and a number of different topper shades to choose from, then I would definitely consider the Mario. Let me know if you have any questions or comments below. I always love to see those. If you'd like to see more from me and you haven't subscribed to my channel already, I would love for you to do so. Thanks again so much for watching. Take care, and I'll see you in my next video.